Greetings to all, Friday News Review with your host Bintang Bernie. And a big shout out to you, Dave, our one and only subscriber. Thanks for joining, mate. Don't worry, you'll have the last laugh. When they're queuing up to listen to the gospel as preached by Bintang in the future, you can say to people, I used to follow him even before ASIO did. So thanks, Dave, once again. It's Easter Friday, so peace, love and happiness to everyone. He says facetiously, as if that's ever going to be the situation in the world. And when you see what I've got to talk to you about today, you'll probably take your chocolate bunny out and stab it to death. It's a depressing subject, but one that needs to be covered. Anyway, speaking of Easter, on that front, just out of interest, my wife and I went into Big W, which is a department store chain here in Australia, and where the local consumer competition body actually came to the conclusion that the supermarket industry in Australia is the most profitable in the entire world. How about that? Wow. So these guys are making a fortune. Anyway, we went into Big W to buy a dress, much healthier than chocolate egg. And at the checkout, the attendant, the lady said to us, would you like to, I forget what it was, a card or something, she offered some sort of thing. Would you like to buy one of these, $2.50 for the Children's Hospital? Now, it puts you in a bind, doesn't it? Because it's for the Children's Hospital. So are you going to be someone who goes, no, I want those sick little kiddies to die? Or are you going to be a decent human being and go, well, of course, I want to help the kiddies out? You see, this is the psychology behind it, which is what niggled me. Now, I refuse. I do other donations, which I don't speak about because that's no one's business, and I'm not here to promote myself as some kind of hero. But what annoys me is a company like Big W asking me to donate money to charity. So I said to the lady, very politely, because having worked in public transport and dealt in frontline customer positions where I've had the most horrific abuse because someone else's bus or train hasn't turned up, I'm always polite to the frontline workers because they're just people doing a job. And this little lady was very polite to us. So I just politely pointed out, I said, no, with the money this place makes, I said, I think they've got a bit of a cheek asking me to fund their charity. And she was fine about it, and we had a little chat and left it at that. Then I went next door to Woolies to pick up, which is the grocery division of Big W, for our international overseas viewers, as if there's heaps. And when I was checking out at the self-serve checkout, because of course they've sacked all of their staff and now you actually act as a part-time employee when you do your shopping because you have to go through and check out yourself and scan your own items. And then at the end, it asks me, do I want to round up my payment for some other charity? You know, it's only a few cents here, a few cents there, of course, but of course timed by the hundreds of thousands of people per day who are doing it would raise an awful lot of money. And once again, I refused. And I was niggled by it. And I came home. So I went home and I did a little research, which I'm apt to do. And I looked at the Woolworths group to see how much money this organisation is making, given that it is working in the most profitable and commercially viable supermarket sector in the entire world. 2024, the year just gone, what they call an NPAT, net profit after tax, okay? Because big companies, when you look at their revenue and then their profit, they write so much stuff down and they adjust so much stuff, it can be very deceiving. And having had a small business myself where for 3 years I paid zero tax perfectly legitimately, where I still used roads, cut my hand open, had to go to a public hospital in Australia that's covered by your tax, by Medicare. That was all fixed up for free, and I contributed nothing in those 3 years and did nothing illegal to do so. So I'm always very skeptical of how corporations and companies write down and adjust tax. So their after tax, this is what Woolworths Group got after tax, their profit was $1.71 billion. Let me say that again. $1.71 billion they made after tax, after write-downs, after all their expenses. That was their net profit. And these pricks want me to put $2.50 into the Children's Hospital. No, Woolies Group, you put $2.50 every time I'm in your shop into the hospital. You can afford it. I can't. So just a little aside, a little bit of a whinge actually from old Bintang there. So that's my rant over. So, what have we got to talk about today? What wonderful, enlightening views have you for us today, Bintang? Well, funny you should ask. I want to talk about a thing called the Rome Statute, and I've written it down here so I get it correct. And specifically Article 8 of the Rome Statute, which is one of the fundamental texts of international law, particularly appropriate when I live in a Western country, which is part of a group of countries who keep banging on about the rules-based order and how we must follow the rules-based order. And yet when you ask anyone for the source document, well, there is no rules-based order source document. So seems quite interesting. But anyway, there are lots of rules in the world. And armed conflict has lots of them, which is why I always laugh when people here talk about, the war crimes committed by one of our, decorated veterans, who shall remain nameless. He puts his name in the paper more than I do. And they say things like, oh, well, that's law, that's war. These things happen in war. Yeah, they do happen in war, but there are rules governing them. And there are laws of wars, which we as a country in Australia here, along with the Western world, have signed up to. Mostly. And we'll come to that later. Anyway, Article 8 of the Rome Statute, it identifies this. Now, I'm going to just read from what I've written, which is copied from the actual text. Intentionally directing attacks against buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, or charitable purposes, historic monuments, hospitals, very important, remember that one, and places where the sick and wounded are collected, provided that they are not military objectives, is a war crime. So, provided they're not military objectives. Now, what that means, just to clarify that bit, in 1982, in the Falklands War, the British, back when they were still decent, they've lost all my respect because of their dealings in Ukraine and where else. But in 1982, in the Falklands War, the British established a large hospital base at their landing area in Port San Carlos in the Falkland Islands, and they painted a big red cross on it. And I remember at one point it was attacked. Possibly accidentally. I don't know if the Argentines deliberately were trying to kill the people in the hospital, but there was confusion, and there was a suggestion of putting an air defence battery and some guns located in the hospital grounds to defend it if it was attacked again, because a bomb lodged in the hospital roof. It was unexploded, and the surgeons were still operating underneath it, hoping it didn't go off, which fortuitously it didn't kill anyone. And I always remember the British commander on the ground at the time, and I can't remember who it was. I think it was before Jeremy Moore, but the Land Forces commander at the time, or the local commander, he said, no, we can't do that because that will contravene our sanctuary under the Geneva Convention, and we will therefore be a legitimate military target. So that's what this point in their own statute is saying, provided they are not military objectives. So in other words, if you paint a red cross on a hospital and then stick it full of anti-aircraft guns, it does become a legitimate military target. So it can be attacked at the discretion of the force, whether you want to do so or not. Just a note for Israel, claiming that someone from Hamas is under every hospital in the entire Arab world does not fall under that category of a military objective. All right, so let's just clarify that for one point. Lying about individuals being in a hospital does not give you the right to bomb it. It means you're war criminals, which you pricks in the Israeli military are. However, I just wanted to clarify that. But so you can see there are laws that say if it's a genuine hospital and it's just being used to treat wounded soldiers, you can't attack it. It is a war crime to attack it. So I thought, in light of that, let's have a look at what's been happening recently. Now, as you all would know, the Trump administration has been bombing Yemen. Now, why is Yemen being bombed in the first place? Well, what happened was the Yemenis decided the attacks in Gaza, as they saw it, as any logical person would see it, is an attempted genocide. And it is. So Yemen decided what it could do to try and fight against genocide, which, remember in the Second World War, it used to be a good thing to fight against genocide. They started attacking Israeli flagged shipping that was going up past their coast in the Red Sea to the port of Eilat, and they had a huge impact on the Israeli economy. They actually would have been doing massive damage to the Israeli economy. So what happened? The British and the Americans started patrols to protect these these Israeli ships and firing and bombing Yemen. So in response, Yemen started attacking not just Israeli ships, but American and British flagged merchant shipping as well. So that's how these things always happen. They escalate one step at a time, but you are only told of the evils of whoever the other side happens to be. In this case, Yemen, how they're attacking British and American shipping. Well, I don't mention that that's in retaliation to what Britain and America are doing. We'll leave that bit conveniently out. Sorry, I get a bit dry in the mouth when I do this. Like I said, I must be nervous. So on the 24th of March, I've written a big list down here, so excuse me if I glance over to the other screen here, but on the 24th of March this year, the Americans bombed the Al Rasul Al Azam Oncology Hospital in the town of Sada in Yemen. Now, this, as it's named, an oncology hospital, this was a fucking cancer treatment facility. Now, who bombs a cancer treatment facility? Pretty fucking nasty. And you would have seen that the thing that I found so frustrating and at the same time oddly comical as well was there was a big hoo-ha about Pete Hegseth having a journalist in the group chat when they were talking about these bombing objectives, and everyone was going on about that and how ridiculous it was. Nobody sort of picked up on the fact that what they were discussing was bombing a hospital. That should have been the key. That should have been the focus of the issue and the story. But the story was the fact that some journalist was in on the group chat and memes were made about it. Meanwhile, everyone forgot the fact you're bombing a fucking hospital. And as I've just described, under the Rome Statute, that is a war crime. So they bombed this hospital. And it wasn't the first time. You see, in the March of 16th this year, they attacked the Anti-Cancer Fund of Yemen stated that the Americans attacked in 13 separate strikes, destroying all 5 blocks of this hospital. Now, the Yemeni Cancer Fund released a statement, and they said that this was part of a systematic American policy that has targeted the Yemeni people for years through bombings and suffocating blockades. Remember, the Americans were right beside their Saudi allies in the blockade of Yemen and denying shipments of medicines and life-saving goods and food getting in and starving these people deliberately. Naval blockade. Why are the American warships patrolling the coast of Yemen? This is before Yemen had attacked any Israeli issues. This was when Yemen and Saudi Arabia were fighting, because Saudi Arabia wanted to overthrow the government, or the rebels who were overthrowing the government. Either way, Saudi Arabia wasn't interfering in a civil war and had taken a side. And the Yemenis beat the shit out of them too, interestingly enough, which is another thing we should look at one day. The Saudis didn't come off too well. Too much sitting on your gold-plated toilets, mate, doesn't make you a good soldier. Anyway, the Yemeni Fund said the suffocating blockade, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis and spreading deadly diseases, including cancer, which had surged due to the use of internationally banned weapons since 2015. One point which is never covered in our so-called media, and which I will look at some point in the future, is the use of depleted uranium weapons. Depleted uranium is actually very effective as a weapon. It's incredibly dense as a material. It's very heavy, so it's very good for things like penetrating armor and what have you. But when it hits the uranium, whilst it's relatively safe and inert to handle in its manufactured form as a munition, although I wouldn't want to play around with it, when it hits, of course, it explodes and molecules of uranium shoot off everywhere, and it does increase background radioactivity. And there are reports that there was a huge surge in cancer and other issues with thyroids and lymph nodes in Iraq after the wars there, because the Americans used an awful lot of depleted uranium munitions because they were firing at Iraqi tanks. So, I mean, this is an ongoing issue. It needs to be looked at. So I started looking at this recent attack on this hospital in Yemen. I started doing some research into the background of American attacks on hospitals. A lot of it I found through a bloke called Alan McLeod. He's got a PhD at Glasgow University. I would have I recommend you have a look at his work on Mint Press. That's Alan McLeod. He's done a huge amount of research, and a lot of this I've gleaned from him. So thank you, Alan. You are a large part of my source material on this. But what I've found is that, for example, in 2017, these are just some of the attacks that America has made, remember, deliberately on hospitals. Okay, in 2017, the Americans under the Trump administration bombed in Syria a hospital, and the Red Crescent there reported that they used white phosphorus bombs in the attack. White phosphorus is another banned weapon, by the way. It's basically, it's how would I describe it? It's almost like a napalm kind of thing. When it gets onto your skin, it reacts with oxygen and it starts to burn fiercely. You can't put it out with water, and it leaves horrific injuries, and obviously will kill you. And I've seen pictures of where the Israelis have used it in Gaza, and I've seen pictures of people on the ground who are, in the picture I was told there were civilians, but you couldn't tell because they're just charred corpses. A white phosphorus is a hideous thing. However, in that attack, the Syrian Red Crescent reported that over 30 people were killed. Okay, now a lot of people will say, well, this the Red Crescent, blah blah blah, all the propaganda gets stuck in people's heads. So let's go to what people would in the West would consider a more reputable source. Médecins Sans Frontières, the French organisation, Doctors Without Borders, internationally respected, internationally recognised as one of the great humanitarian organisations around the world. Now, in 2015, they were running a hospital in Kunduz in Afghanistan. All right, so this is Médecins Sans Frontières' own hospital. They're running it. And they advised the US military, this is our hospital, here's the coordinates, and we can assure you there are no Taliban here. It is being used to treat locals and people injured in the airstrikes that you guys are doing. It is purely a medical facility, and therefore untouchable under international law. What, of course, happened was that the Americans attacked it, and they killed over 42 people in that hospital, okay, in an MSF hospital. And there was an internal inquiry conducted by the US military, and they found that the crew was attacked by an AC-130 gunship, which is basically a Hercules aircraft with 30mm high-velocity cannons sticking out the side. Very, very destructive. The crew actually kicked back against their order to attack the hospital and questioned the legality. Okay, so good on the crew. They've at least stopped and gone, well, hang on. We're here to follow orders, but there are rules, and this doesn't look like it fits within the rules. They were overridden and told to attack anyway. So exactly 42 people then later were dead. Now, as Alan McLeod points out, this was actually the first time that one Nobel Peace Prize winner in Obama had attacked another Nobel Peace Prize winner in Médecins Sans Frontières. Very bizarre Orwellian situation. That's almost Fawlty Tower-esque, isn't it? So, Obama, the guy that got, Nobel Peace Prizes, well done. He bombed 7 countries, by the way, in his time in office. The man who received the Nobel Peace Prize bombed 7 countries. Work that one out. Now, one of the ones he bombed was Libya. Now, Libya was Africa's most prosperous state. Now, the average person, of course, would see Libya as, Gaddafi, he was evil, he was a terrorist, all these labels. The Libyans had an amazingly high standard of income. They were well looked after. They had a socialised medical system like we have here in Australia. They had subsidised housing from the government. There was an awful lot of social programs that Gaddafi had instituted using the oil wealth that he'd exported. Gaddafi also made one hideous mistake. He proposed replacing the dollar throughout Africa with an African local currency backed on gold, the dinar, which was going to basically wipe out all of the debt of the International Bank, which is just a leech, and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which is screwing poor countries to death with massive interest repayments on loans that they've given. He was going to dissolve all of that. and provide a gold-based currency, because Africa is rich in gold, and have the gold actually used to support Africa rather than it being ripped out of Africa to make us all rich. And of course, after that, what happened? We had to bomb him and kill him, didn't we? Now, excuse me. In July of 2011, okay, NATO, the backing, under the backing of America. When you say NATO, you may as well say America. America runs NATO. There's no, let's be honest about it. They bombed the city of Zliten. I think I pronounced that right. And including in that bombing, these lovely NATO jets who were supposed to be bringing peace and prosperity and helping the Libyan people. Well, they killed over 85 people, and over 11 of those were at the medical centre in Zliten. So that's the prosperity that we brought to Libya. Then, of course, we went on to destroy the country, and we have the achievement. Well done, that bitch Hillary Clinton. Libya became the first country in modern history with an active human slave market. Way to go, Hillary. You're a real champion, a real trooper for the cause. So now, and ever since, Libya, as you know, has been a failed state. It has gone from the most prosperous country in the whole of Africa. It's now a shithole. And who's responsible for that? We are. We bombed it. We destroyed it. They were much better off under Gaddafi than they are now. Same, ironically, with Iraq. They were better off under Saddam Hussein than they are now. Not popular views, I know. Okay, now, it goes on, of course. All right. In 2003, speaking of Iraq and Saddam Hussein, during the Iraq War, where we, invaded a sovereign nation based on lies, we attacked the Iraqi Red Crescent Maternity Hospital in Baghdad. Now, this was a big hospital in Baghdad. Baghdad, unlike America, had free healthcare. All right. It's amazing how many of these countries we're attacking and, rescuing from their primitive oppressive states have better facilities and better standards of living than the country actually attacking them. And prior to the Gulf War, the Iraqis had a lower infant mortality rate than the United States of America. Work that out. Less babies died in Iraq than died in the United States, supposedly the world's most advanced and wealthiest country. Wonder who's rescuing whom. So we attacked this maternity hospital. Now, prior to the invasion, this hospital was delivering, on average, 35 babies a day. Okay, so think of that. On average, 35 women a day were giving birth in this hospital. Shows you how busy it was. We bombed it, and we wounded over 25 people, including medical staff. We don't know how many people were killed. But we do know that UNICEF, once again, see, we're using what people consider reputable sources here. UNICEF themselves, they noted a sharp rise in infant mortality after this bombing. So that's not Iraqi propaganda, that's not Russian propaganda. You can pretty much say that's factual information. I'll take that as factual. Okay, I don't think UNICEF are cooking the books. It continues on. In 1999, in May, under the Clinton administration. Oh, yes, old Bill, Captain Headjob. Now, he was, as you know, bombing Yugoslavia. We dropped bombs in the city of Niš, and we dropped them on a hospital and an outdoor market. And over 15 people were killed and over 60 were wounded. Now, the bombs we used were cluster munitions. Now, cluster munitions is basically, if you've ever heard of the Claymore mine, it's invented by some similar nasty little prick in some back room. So, a cluster bomb is essentially a bomb that falls down. It's full of like ball bearings. When it gets to the ground, it explodes and it shoots these things out at massive velocity. If you're standing near one, you basically are shredded like a piece of Swiss cheese. They've subsequently been banned, of course, because they specifically target humans rather than structures, tanks and things like that. They're not much good against a tank, actually. Tank's armour will defeat most cluster munitions. They're designed for what they call soft skin vehicles, like trucks and people. So they've been banned. But of course, in 2003 and 2004, the great warrior for peace, Joe Biden, they delivered thousands of them to Ukraine to use against Russian troops. And until then, Russia had stated there was no evidence that they were using cluster munitions. After which, I still believe that Russia has not used cluster munitions in response, but I have to look into that. But certainly, we gave them to Ukraine to use in that conflict, even though it's a banned weapon, which makes you wonder why we had them in stock in the first place, doesn't it? Rules-based order, guys. 2 weeks after that strike in Nis, we fired some cruise missiles in the hospital in Belgrade, hitting an occupied maternity ward. Okay, that was nice. Now, we go back to 1998. About this time, I don't know if you remember, if you recall, Osama bin Laden was responsible for attacks on the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, terrorist attacks. And so in response, because of course we don't do terrorism, but in response, what happened was the Americans bombed the Al-Shifa medicine factory in Sudan. And they claimed at the time that it was making chemical weapons for Osama bin Laden. And of course it wasn't. That was a lie. And they knew it was a lie. We'll talk about that in a sec. It was a production facility for medicines. It produced antibiotics and anti-malarial drugs for the population of Sudan. And we blew it up, cruise missiled it into a smoking room, destroyed the whole thing. The German ambassador to Sudan, see, once again, look at the source documents of these people. It's not the Sudanese, minister for health, or you could sit there and, go, oh, well, he's biased or whatever. This is the German ambassador to Sudan, who afterwards estimated that as a result of the destruction of that facility and the fact that anti-malarial drugs and antibiotics were no longer available to the population of Sudan, tens of thousands of people died unnecessarily. Now, we just sit here and wash our hands. We've just gone and blown up a centre that makes drugs to keep people alive, to keep them healthy, and as a result, tens of thousands of people have died. And we bang on about the rules-based order. Now, when the report came out that this wasn't a chemical weapons factory, did the Americans come out and apologise? Did they say, well, we need to look better, we need to improve? No, Madeleine Albright, remember that lovely lady, that bitch tried to suppress the report, and she made efforts to try and stop the report being made public that it wasn't a chemical weapons factory, because it sounds so much better when you destroy a chemical weapons factory than when you blow up a country's medicine productions. So, once again, these are the people we're dealing with. Okay, 1993, so it just keeps on giving, doesn't it? The US had soldiers in Sudan working under the auspices of the United Nations, an organisation which they basically control anyway. And they did an attack on a hospital in Mogadishu. And now the Chicago Tribune, see, once again, here we go again. An American newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, did a report at the time. And their report says, and I quote, "It will probably never be known how many Somalis died in that attack. One reason for this is that US helicopters attacked reporters and photographers with stun grenades and chased them away from the scene." So, just like our Israeli scum who bury ambulances in the sand, the Americans, after realising that they'd mortared a hospital, chased away the reporters, actually attacked them and buzzed them with helicopters, pretty much physically attacked them, assaulted them to get them away, because we don't want you to see. Because, of course, we're all about truth and justice, as long as it's the truth and justice that we want you to know about, not the real truth and justice. So how is that? And that's from the Chicago Tribune, an American newspaper. So, deny that one. 1983, the invasion of Grenada. I do remember this because the Americans invaded Grenada in 1983. Grenada was a Commonwealth country. Now, just like the much vaunted Article 5 in NATO, an attack on one Commonwealth country is supposed to constitute an attack on all Commonwealth countries. But what happened? The British sent a warship, I think it was HMS Glamorgan from memory. Don't know why it popped into my head. And it stood by off the coast and did nothing while the Americans went in and invaded Grenada. Why did they invade Grenada? Because the locals were overthrowing their government. They weren't happy with it, and they were led by a socialist front. And you can have any freedom you want as long as it's not socialism. So much for the right of self-determination. So because it was a socialist uprising, the Americans went in and squashed it. And in so doing, they dropped bombs on the Richmond Hill Mental Hospital, which killed 20, they reported 20 dead and 40 injured. But the New York, God, I'm getting tongue-tied. The New York Times reported the number was actually twice that. Once again, look at where the source documents are. The New York Times. They're saying that the Americans were fudging the figures. They killed more people. We go down to South America, El Salvador, 1989. The US supplied jets and helicopters which bombed the San Ildefonso Hospital, killed 5 people. And then, of course, now you think, oh, well, that's just the start. That was the warm-up, the appetizer. Then paratroopers were ferried in on US helicopters, and they killed and abducted the medical staff. And one of them happened to be a French national. Her name was Madeleine Lagadec. I hope I got that right. And she was a nurse. And it was later found out that the nice people that the Americans were supporting, they took her and they raped her for 8 hours. And then after they'd done with her, they shot her like a piece of meat. They executed her. Fucking disgusting how these people behave. These are the people we support. What the fuck is wrong with the world? France, people in France, there was footage of it, and footage of a mutilated body was circulated in France. There was an outrage in France, in the French government, and they issued an international arrest warrant for 4 officers who were in charge of it, who were backed by the Americans and trained by the Americans. You know, when are we ever going to learn? Throughout 81 to 84, Nicaragua. That was you may remember the Contra rebels, where the Americans were backing the Contras. Ronald Reagan, they're my boys. Oh, where am I? So America poured huge sums and funds into backing the Contras because they didn't want, once again, a socialist government to arise in a sovereign nation which had every right to have a socialist government if it so desired. But of course the Americans intervened. Not on our watch, pal. You'll get the government that we tell you can have. Now, the Contras went around in death squads, and it's stated they attacked over 63 healthcare centres. And this was their policy as part of an effort to terrorise the locals and turn support away for the socialist government. And that's often a tactic of countries, to deliberately terrorise people, attack hospitals. You stand up for the government, you stand up against us, this is the penalty. It's horrible, absolutely horrible. They were stupid, like most thugs are, because they left graffiti everywhere, and they used to write on the hospital walls that we are the lion cubs of Reagan. Yes, Ronald Reagan they're referring to. We're his boys, because he was funding them. Reagan referred to them as, where can I find, sorry, I've got this quote. Reagan referred to them as the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. Okay, that's how Ronald Reagan described a bunch of people in death squads going around and shooting up hospitals and medical facilities. Dr. Michael Gray, the chair of occupational medicine at Keno Hospital in Arizona. Okay, so once again, the Americans going down and investigating. He went down to Nicaragua, and he described, his words, the Contras as no different than the SS at the end of World War II. And these were the people you were funding and supporting, America. Think about that. Now, it goes deeper and deeper, and it goes back. We're now into the era of Vietnam, okay? Isn't it sad that we've got such a history of targeting hospitals? It actually gets even worse here, because it was official policy in the American conflict to target hospitals. Now, isn't that appalling? Target hospitals. This is the country that stands up for truth, justice, the rules-based order. Okay, the Rome Statute wasn't in existence back then. The Rome Statute's much more recent than Vietnam, but the Geneva Convention was. Okay, and still made it a war crime to attack hospitals. Okay, so we're looking in Vietnam now. We've got actual testimony from Alan Stevenson, who was a former Army intelligence specialist. And he said himself, this is the guy saying, I regularly targeted hospitals in Quang Tri province in Vietnam. Now, this is his statement. These are the people you're dealing with, the mentality. The bigger the hospital, the better it was. It was not hush-hush, as we didn't see it as nasty. His testimony was corroborated by Air Force Captain Gerald Greven, who said that he personally ordered bombing raids against medical centres, as it was official policy to look for hospitals as targets. There you go. 1972, December the 22nd, US planes dropped over 100 bombs on the Bac Mai Hospital in Hanoi. The Bac Mai Hospital was a 1,000-bed facility. It was huge. 28 medical staff, multiple patients killed, the entire facility. Think of it, a 1,000-bed hospital, flattened. Okay? Congressional hearing into actions in Laos, I think that's how you pronounce it, by the US military, discovered that bombing of hospitals was routine. Interesting thing about Laos is that it remains the most unenviable record. It was the most bombed country per capita in history and still has that dubious record to this day. They drop more bombs per person in Laos than has ever been done in history before. Wonderful. Cambodia, 1973, former Army Captain Rowan Malthus testified that while serving with the Combined Intelligence Centre in Vietnam, he helped plan attacks on Cambodian health centres. We were planning the bombing of hospitals. I think it was a good thing. Okay, their justification was that North Korean army, the NVA, was sending soldiers there for medical help. And the Americans saw it as basically an untouchable bastion. So they just went in and bombed another country and its hospital, which, as we stated, is a war crime. Doesn't matter that the enemy are using it for treating their soldiers. That's what hospitals are for. That's why you can't bomb them in war. Because you're bombing wounded, injured people, and you're bombing medical staff who have no combat potential at all. They're just saving lives. Even back as far as North Korea. Now, thing that people don't know about North Korea was bombed into the Stone Age during the Korean War, in the 3 years of that war. It got to the point where the senior US officer in charge of the Air Force actually reported, we have nothing left to bomb. We can't find any targets. Can you imagine that? That's how much they bombed North Korea. And you wonder why these people are distrustful of us and they don't like us. They bombed everything. The North Korean government, okay, so people will take that with a grain of salt, but I have no reason to see any issue with that. They estimate the US destroyed over 1,000 hospitals during that war. And given the Americans' own testimony that they couldn't even find any more targets, they ran out of things to bomb, they bombed everything, well, you've got to add some, add some justification to that. They leveled entire cities in that war. They deliberately bombed dams, breached dams, which flooded huge areas, wiped out farming areas, rural areas. They destroyed that country. They devastated it. The fact that today we say these people are living in difficult conditions, we fucking put them there. Oh, I laugh. Now, the one guy, Professor Bruce Cummings, he's considered America's foremost expert on Korea, so you should look this guy up and have a look. He estimates that the United States killed approximately, this is horrific, between 1950 and 53, during the Korean War, he estimates the United States killed approximately 25% of the North Korean population. And just have a think of that for a minute, 25%. And yet somehow I'm supposed to hate Kim Jong-il. He's a bastard. Okay, and we'll take a look at North Korea lately, because there's a lot of bullshit surrounding North Korea. I'm not saying it's a saint and that the leaders are wonderful and it's a great country and all that. Well, what I'm saying is we've been fed a lot of lies, and I'll prove some to you with pictures at a later date. And it's funny how it's a hereditary government system, and he's called a dictator, but all the Gulf states have hereditary government systems passed down from families, and they're called kings. I wonder what the difference between a dictator and a king is. And I can guarantee you one thing, women have a lot more freedom and civil rights in North Korea than they do in Saudi Arabia. Man, think about that. Anyway, that was my cheery little update for Easter. It's a wonderful world out there, isn't it? But apart from that, it is good that people think, there are people in the world like Alan McLeod and Bruce Cummings, people who actually try to give you the truth and the reality and show you what's going on behind the scenes. And that's what the Winston Smith Project is all about, is pushing away the lies of Big Brother and finding out the truth. So to those of you who tune in, I hope you enjoy it. To those of you who don't and you listen to mainstream media, you'll be a fucking zombie the rest of your life. Have a great Easter. Enjoy. Just be kind to one another. And be aware that the world is full of lies and half-truths. This is Bintang Bernie signing off.